So the next speaker is Ken Goldberg. So Ken is the William Floyd Distinguished Chair in Engineering at UC Berkeley. He's also the co-founder and chief scientist at MB Robotics. And Ken is not only a roboticist, but he's also an artist. So he's also has an appointment in the School of Art Practice at UC Berkeley. And also, so we just saw that there's a lot of intersection between robotics and rhetorics. There's also a lot of intersection between engineering, robotics, and art. And I guess today you're going to talk to us exactly about this intersection, so I'm very much looking forward to that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I have to say, it's a real honor to be here, and I want to thank Jean-Paul in particular for reaching out to all of us and bringing me here. I also changed my slides around a little bit based on what I saw this morning, because I sort of wanted to talk about both some art and some science in this context of Jean-Paul. So this is my group at Berkeley. These students are really should get the credit for most of the work I do. I wanted to just say it's good to be back in person after the last 3 years. And what I want to mention this, start with this problem. It's a motion planning problem, a bit different than what we talked about this morning, but it has a similar structure in many ways. The idea here is to orient an object, in this case a polygonal extruded object, by a sequence of grasping motions with a very simple parallel jaw gripper. And here's 4 runs of that that plan, the motion plan, each one vertically, that all end up with the object aligned with the major axis of the gripper. So the problem statement is that if you're given an arbitrary object, any polygon, can you find a sequence of gripper actions that will have this effect, that it will orient the part up to the period of symmetry, or report that no such sequence exists? And so there's some assumptions that we make. It's a planar motions here and frictionless. But so the idea of the algorithm is to first observe something about the mechanics of pushing and squeezing. So, and this is really this was work that was done when I was a student of Matt Mason, who's sitting right there. So correct me, Matt, if I get some of this, if I'm wrong here. This is actually Mason's law, that if you start to push an object like this, as you continue to push it, it will land and stop moving on an edge. And so the center of mass, as you see, moves in a monotone, decreasing fashion. So what we can do is capture this with a width function that captures the width. Actually, squeezing now is where we have 2 jaws making contact, and you have a similar structure where this piecewise sinusoidal function is actually is capturing the distance between the 2 jaws. And there are local minima and maxima in this function. And then we can wrap this around into a torus. So we can capture the idea that if we take a range of orientations coming in, that when the jaws close, there'll be a range of there'll be a much smaller range of orientations coming out. So the input range of orientations is on the bottom, and the output is another range of orientations, but will be singletons at each of the stable orientations. Then the nice thing we can do with this is we can actually use it to capture, we can actually compose a push function or the width function with that squeeze function and get a combined push-squeeze function, as you see in the bottom. But then we can use that to construct a plan. And the idea is to consider here, we're unrolling this sequence, or sorry, this connected torus, just flattening it out and wrapping it around. And so we're looking for regions, a pre-image, if you will, of the blue image that shows you that if you started at the green and you closed the jaws, it would end up within the blue range. And we can then iterate. So here, let's illustrate. If you start out in the blue, you end up in the red. And then if you wanted to find a target for the blue, you start out there with the green. And so to match all these up, you just have to understand the relationships, or measure the relationships of all the intervals, and you can recover the steps of the motion. So here's a motion for an object shaped like a house, And you can see that if we push it in this direction, it will then line up. Another ancient video back in the days of VHS here. Just like Flash, very hard to recover these. All right, so, and this is guaranteed to always orient the part regardless of its initial orientation. Again, no sensing is required here. Now, the other thing that was a challenge Matt said to me was, he said, well, if you can prove a completeness, then you can graduate. So I spent an entire summer working on this problem, and so this relates again to what we were talking about this morning of these. It's one thing to construct a solution; it's another to show that it exists in all cases, that a motion plan exists. So here, the idea was that there was possible to construct a formal representation of these step functions that map from S1 to S1, and then to characterize the period of symmetry that exists within that. And then the claim is that we can always find a sequence of intervals of increasing measure until we reach a period of symmetry. And so then the idea was to start at some S interval that has measure h, and begins at some value theta and ends at theta plus h, and then that's the projection of its. The S is how it projects into the squeeze function. And then the claim is that we can either, we can find a larger interval. There exists a theta, a positioning that will enlarge theta, so it's the image is smaller than the current h, or for all theta, that all values of theta, that the projection is exactly equal to h. So now we take those conditions, turn that into a function, as you see on the bottom, and then we integrate that over a period of symmetry from 0 to t. That's a period of symmetry in the object. And if you look at this construction, we can change the bounds, move things around, and then fortunately this integrates to 0. So then what that says by the mean value theorem is that that's exactly what that function says, is that either there exists a point that's greater than 0, or there exists a point, or less than 0, or it's 0 everywhere. So that gives us our proof of completeness and allowed me to graduate from Matt's lab. So that was the completeness result. We could also prove complexity bounds when I did it to n squared, and subsequently Doug Iyer already proved that, extended it to linear. And it's been extended in a variety of different ways over the years. So that was about the time I started teaching at USC, and I was invited very warmly by the promotion group that has been mentioned earlier. And several of them are here in the room. I remember this fondly. This was outside Rome? Outside Rome. In Rome, right. Okay, all right, excellent. It was really wonderful, and I remember being so delighted to be included, and then it began a relationship of collaborations and interactions that still continues to this day. I also want to mention this, which is it was a few years after that Antonio and I got together to organize a workshop on minimalism in robotics, and this is you may recognize some of these characters here. That's Jean-Paul. There's Antonio, John is here, Matt, and there's me. So 4 of us are here today, and we miss the 5th very much. All right. So on the idea of motion planning, the other thing I would like to add is that very recently I've been working with a postdoc, Jeff Ichnowski, and looking at the problem of optimized motion planning, and in particular optimizing using the grasp constraints. So I won't go into all the details here, but this can be posed as an optimization problem and numerically solved. And the idea is that we're shrinking down the motion speeds and to find a motion that will max out one of the torque limits. And so we recently extended this to handling inertial constraints. So you can also formulate inertial constraints in the same framework, just adds another constraint to the objective. And and then you can optimize these motions. So where there's a constraint. Now I'll just show you what this looks like there. So that's moving a glass filled with beads, where the motion constraint is to make sure that the vector continues to point toward the bottom of the glass so that none of these beads will fall out. And if you remind me about this at dinner tonight, I'll show you another variation on this. All right, so now I'll shift gears to talking a little bit, and it relates to what Celine was just talking about the issue of semantics. What do we mean when we talk about a robot? And I think we can go back to the ancients here. Ovid's Metamorphosis talks about the story of Pygmalion, and the sculptor who falls in love with his creature, his sculpture. And then we go up to the golem of Prague, again, created out of clay to assist the rabbi. And then Da Vinci, of course, famous, his variety of different robotic devices that goes up through the 1700s and all the automata, the amazing mechanical systems that are built, including our friend von Kempelen. You all remember the Mechanical Turk. And right around this time, E.T.A. Hoffman writes The Sandman. If you're not familiar, it's a wonderful story, a parable about a boy who falls in love with an android. And then 100 years later, Frankenstein. And 100 years after that, we have the flu pandemic of 1918. The reason I bring that up is that right around this time, a book comes out on exoticism, and importantly, Sigmund Freud publishes his book on das Unheimliche, which is later termed the uncanny. It's 1919, right after the pandemic. And then exactly a year after that, Karl Čapek comes out with the word, coins the word robot from Arbeit in Worker in his famous theater piece, Rossum's Universal Robots. So just coming back to what is a robot, what does that word resonate? Then what are these meanings culturally for that word, which has been adopted almost universally? So it takes on many forms after that point. Fritz Lang does this famous film Metropolis with a feminized robot. Asimov's iRobot series with the laws of robotics we're familiar with. Nam June Paik does a series of sculptures and installations with art installations with robots. And then in 1970, Masahiro Mori publishes a paper on design of robots, and he postulates this idea of what later becomes called the uncanny valley. But I think everyone's familiar with it. It's the idea that if you loosely plot, just conceptually, it's not any kind of accurate axis here, but you have a non-human to human axis, and then you have likability on the vertical axis, that as things become more human, they become more likable in general until you reach a point. And this is what the uncanny valley. So you get a point where the similarity is too close for comfort. And there's a great sense of discomfort there. And that's the uncanny, what's later been called the uncanny valley. And that relates to Freud, but it was a woman who's now living in Britain, Yazia Reinhardt, who made the connection between Freud and Masahiro Mori. And I recently was able to reach her, and I want to tell you for the first time, no one knows this beside Casper, the organizer, but she will be giving a plenary speech at ICRA this year. She was the one who coined the term. Anyway, uncanny valley has been used in a vast variety of applications. It's used by all animators that if you make the eyes in an animated character too realistic, you make the audiences very uncomfortable. So that's why most characters, Pixar and others, use very sort of caricatured eyes. And this is explored in thousands of themes in films, and also by our colleague Hiroshi Ishiguro in building what he calls Geminoids, which are basically twins of humans and researchers. It's been used, the uncanny comes up in all kinds of contexts. So here's, why am I forgetting his name? Stellark, thank you. Stellark from Australia, good, John, with his implants an ear and has it grow on his arm, and he claims to actually hear through it. But this again is playing off this idea of the uncanny in our reactions. My own work is, in some way, looking at a variation on this was the project called the Telegarden that we launched in 1995, the early days of the web. It was a real garden, but tended by remote users from all over the world who would come in and use their Mosaic browsers at that time, very early internet connection, but they would be able to observe the garden and then plant and water their own seeds, so collectively tend the garden. So we started this really as an art installation. It was kind of a critique of the claims of the internet at the time, and also an engineering project. But we didn't count on was the amount of people who would be interested in planting seeds. Pretty quickly, it grew so vastly that it turned into more of a study on the tragedy of the commons. So we had to cut back the garden periodically to keep up with it. We published a book with a series of 8 artists, 8 engineers, and 8 philosophers, looking at thinking about the implications of this in the context of the internet. In particular, the issue of what it said about the distinction between virtual and distal reality. That the virtual reality is something that's fictional, constructed inside the computer, and distal reality is something that is real but distant, so is mediated by some sort of computer system. And the line between them was really what we were trying to think about. And I would say that in the 20 years since we wrote the book, this line has even become more ambiguous. Let's see, I'm going to skip that. I wanted to look up this. I had seen Jean-Paul one of the very last times I saw him speak in Canada and Montreal. He was giving a talk about this. He showed this beautiful work with pianos, and I was trying to find it, and I was like, pianos moving. This is the kind of stuff I kept finding. Of course, there's always our piano movers problems. But then I finally was able to find it, what I was looking for. And so Jean-Paul collaborated on this project with Celeste Boursier-Mougenot, who's an extremely acclaimed artist, and it's very beautiful. I think everyone who knows the movers problem will appreciate what's going on here. And this would just run for hours. And there was a camera overhead that would make sure that the robots would plan very beautiful, elegant motions, but make sure that they didn't collide with each other. So that, and then in 2020, I want to mention a project that my students and I initiated as somewhat of a sequel to the Telegarden that we call the Alpha Garden. And whereas the Telegarden was about remote teleoperation and collaboration, the social dynamics of users over the internet, this project is about artificial intelligence and about the claims, I think somewhat exaggerated claims that we experience today about the promise of deep learning. And so the question here is whether we could get a robot to tend a physical garden. And so we set up a system in the lab, and this is showing you a time lapse. We exhibited this in New York, and here's a time lapse of the growth. And what happens is that this was launched in February of 2020, so right before the pandemic. And then as we moved into March, they shut down access to the galleries, and we were not able to go back in. And so we could no longer tend the garden. We couldn't do anything. The water was shut off. We just had the cameras in there, so we were able to watch what happened essentially from the sideline. And it was very interesting to see something I didn't expect, but all these plants, essentially they were growing, but they suddenly went to flower, and they started shooting out these almost it's almost like desperation to me that they're reaching out, because at this point it hasn't been watered for several weeks, and it's really just, you know, trying to get attention. It's just striving for attention. And it's tragic because we had to watch this thing essentially fade until late April. It was essentially dead. So just considering this, I thought of this, reminded me of something I was thinking and struggling with it for a while until it hit me that those last few stages reminded me of Guernica in some way. That there was some, especially this figure on the right, there's some idea of this garden kind of trying to desperately reach out. So I think this again comes back to Celine's point. I think that robots are mirrors. They're mirrors of ourselves and our what we imagine ourselves to be. So coming back to this question of what is a robot, and I know that we could discuss this over dinner and we'll probably get many different answers. It's really frustrating because in our field we can't even define the fundamental element. But I think if we're going to answer this question, it's intimately tied up with the question, what is intelligence? And this we also know to be extremely difficult to answer. Turing's test only offers a simulacrum, and as we know, it's very easy to fool. Many people can fail the Turing test, let's put it that way. And if we even want to understand that in the embodied form of what we are talking about here in robots, the bigger question is, well, what is alive? What does it mean to be alive? And that is, again, a very deep and fundamental question. We don't have a good answer for that. I mean, we may know some things about carbon forms on our own planet, but we don't know that how we could more broadly define the idea of something being alive or not. So, so the very last thing I want to leave you with is this project that Jean-Paul and I talked about several times, and he was very excited about and proud of, which was, again, with Celeste, they did this project at the Venice Biennale in 2015, and it was a very elaborate system that had, as you saw, those platforms, and then what was built around it was a living tree. And so the system, this would very, very slowly move in this environment, inside the pavilions, and interact with visitors, and was really a major piece recognized by the international art world. So with that, I want to say I miss Jean-Paul enormously. He was a wonderful colleague, great friend, and a real inspiration. Thank you.